Have you ever thought to yourself that you're pretty insignificant? Maybe you've looked at the great scale of history and thought, I'm just nothing. Maybe you think that you're too small a detail for God to pay attention to. Maybe you can go, in my desire to serve the Lord, I'm such a small little detail. Why would God pay attention to me? Today, we're going to be talking about the God of details. We're going to be in the book of First Chronicles, and we're going to be looking at how detail conscious God is and how he is concerned about the smallest of those details and how that can relate to your life and to mine. And we'll do that today when we come right back. Well, hi, and welcome to Bible Study with Friends, where our goal is to help you get more impact from your Bible study. I'm here with my friend, Kyle Grinstead. Kyle and I are going to continue in our study in First Chronicles. We're going to do from verse 1 down to verse 26, and we're going to see an interesting group. Now, remember, in First Chronicles, the whole purpose of the writer of Chronicles is to adjust the people coming out of the exile of the Babylonian captivity, going back to Israel, reacquainting them with their roots and getting them so that they can identify with geographic areas that they're going to resettle. Everybody can't go back to Jerusalem. There are people that are going to have to resettle in the lands around Jerusalem, and Persia is letting them go back to reestablish the kingdom with Jerusalem as its capital, with the temple there. So we've seen the emphasis in Chronicles is reestablishing what family you're in so that you can identify when you go back to who is who and where they should be. An interesting thing about this, I was looking at a map. Let me show you this. We're going to see a term today that kind of throws you if you're not paying attention. Now, here's a map of the 12 tribes at this point. There's going to be an interesting terminology today in these tribes of the Transjordan. Let's go into this scripture right away. Starting in chapter 5, verse 1, we've got the beginning of the genealogies of the Transjordan tribes. Now, by Transjordan, we're talking about people that are on the eastern side of the Jordan River. So in that map, you've got the Jordan, and everything on the west side is Israel, and then you've got the Transjordan. Now, in that history, why the Transjordan tribes are significant. Do you remember how when Israel returns from the wilderness experience and they start to come into the land, do you remember how they come in? Geographically, how?
Yeah, they cross over the Jordan.
They swing around to the east side of the Jordan, and they come in at Jericho, about halfway through what was going to become Israel. And they cross the Jordan and go in. When they swung around from the wilderness experience after 40 years, the Transjordan tribes immediately settled on the east side of the Jordan. They didn't have to cross the Jordan.
Yeah.
So you have Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh that basically settled. They had their cities, they took this area, and what they did was they left their women and children and let them hole up there, and they came with the rest of Israel across and fought with the rest of the tribes. And then after the victories and after Israel was established, they went back to this area. So let's pick back up in verse 1. We're going to go very quickly through a lot of this because a lot of them are names that we just don't relate to at all. But in verse 1, there's an interesting comment about Reuben. Did you notice that? Go ahead and read verse 1.
Okay. Now the sons of Reuben, the firstborn of Israel, for he was the firstborn, but because he defiled his father's bed, his birthright was given to the sons of Joseph, the son of Israel, so that he is not enrolled in the genealogy according to the birthright.
So in the genealogy, he's not mentioned first, even though he was the
Yeah.
firstborn. And it explains this little detail that the reason he is the firstborn, but he doesn't have the firstborn birthright, is because he defiled his father's bed. And there's a little number here. It's the letter B. So you go to B and you go to Genesis 35:22, 49:4, and read that. And basically what it was, Reuben slept with his father's concubine.
Okay.
He slept with a woman who was also producing children for his father. As a result of that, he defiled his father's bed. It was almost incest, but not quite. But it was against the law of Israel. And therefore, he lost his birthright. Okay?
Okay.
And it's just an interesting detail that the chronicler is getting across to people that says, okay, Reuben has a black eye against him, and yet we're not going to leave him out of the Chronicles. We're going to make sure that Reuben is included, and he's included with a territory. He has a land, okay? So now we go back and pick back up with the details of Reuben. The birthright was given to Joseph, although Judah, who is another son, is the one through whom the leader comes. Look at verse 2. It says, though Judah prevailed over his brothers, and from him came the leader, yet the birthright belonged to Joseph. So he's basically saying Reuben lost the birthright, Joseph got it. But that is not who God chose to bring about the leader. Now, remember, what are some of the concerns of the chronicler?
He's focused on the priesthood, the Levitical line, and the line of Messiah.
And Messiah. So the line of Messiah is not coming through Joseph. He's not coming through Reuben. He's coming through Judah.
Yeah.
And so Judah produces the leader who was King David, and through King David is going to be the Messiah. So he's just got a kind of a footnote here.
Yeah.
That even though Reuben didn't get the birthright, Joseph got the birthright, but the leadership, the Messiah, doesn't come through the guy who got the birthright. He comes through Judah.
Yeah.
It's an interesting.
That's interesting.
God is interested in details.
Uh-huh.
He's interested in details, but he doesn't leave out, you could say, the little people, right? Because Reuben's got this black eye. He's been pushed to the side because of this sin up here in his father's bed, but he is not forgotten. So we get this in verse 3. We start talking about the sons. The sons of Reuben, the firstborn of Israel, were these guys, all right? And there are 4 brothers. And then there is a 5th son. And we don't know why he's mentioned as but apparently he was from a different mother. We've seen that in the past. But there are the 4 sons, and then there's Joel. Joel is the 5th son of Reuben. And Joel, he has a descendant through all these guys. And at verse 6, there's again a detailed footnote. One of the sons of Joel, okay, Beerah, his son, whom Tilgath-Pilneser, the king of Assyria, carried away into exile. He was the leader of the Reubenites. So this tribe of Reuben become an entire region known as a group of people called the Reubenites. And at this point in the generation of Joel, they're taken captive by Assyria. So Syria comes down and he takes the northern tribes. And we're going to remember that little detail in just a minute. But he takes the northern tribes, and the descendants of Reuben were taken. They came down, took all the tribes except Judah and Benjamin, remember?
Yep.
They survived because of Jerusalem. So that little detail in the genealogy of Reuben. Now then it goes down and it says they settled. It goes into the children, and then it goes into the geography. Now this is important because in verse 9, it talks about the geography, because the chronicler wanted these people that come out of the Persian captivity to go back to these geographic areas and settle them as natives. We're returning to the land where we were from.
Yeah.
So geography is important. And it says that's where their cattle were. And in the days of Saul, this was way before King David, way before the captivity, they made war with the Hagrites. And the Hagrites is very interesting there. There's going to talk about the Hagrites in verse 18. But the Hagrites, there is actual proof of the Hagrites in archaeological records in the kingdom of Assyria. The Hagrites are actually mentioned as a people. So people say, oh, these names don't appear anywhere. They're all made up. The Bible is fictitious. It's not history. Here's a historical detail that's been proven by archaeology.
That's cool.
Yeah. And they occupied all the land east of Gilead. Now, let's talk for a second about Gilead. Let me go back to this map. Gilead is really, here's the Jordan, this blue line right here. And everything this side of Jordan, on the east side of Jordan, is the Transjordan area. And in reality, this whole area is called Gilead.
Okay.
And this is talking about Reuben here. He's got this geographic area as part of Gilead, and he settles through this whole area. And now we're going to talk about the next one up is Gad. Now we're going to go to the genealogy of Gad, another tiny little group, not big geography. Says in verse 11, the sons of Gad lived opposite them, that is opposite of Reuben, in the land of Bashan as far as Selaka. Now, some of these cities, they don't even know where they are yet. They haven't been discovered yet. But some of them have, and some of them are real cities. So the chronicler is being very specific into the reality of where things are. Now we're talking about Gad, this area of Gad just north of Reuben, and you start to see Joel, and he was the chief of this area. And all of a sudden, the kinsmen of their father's household. It's very interesting here that all of a sudden we start to talk about sons and kinsmen. Okay.
Okay.
And in 13, 14, you start to see now there were some sons, the son of Gilead, the son of Michael, son. And then it comes in 15, you have Ahi, the son of Abdiel, and the son of Gunian, who was head of their father's households. Now, all of a sudden, when we get up to Manasseh, you're going to start to see some interesting things about descendants of Manasseh. And the chronicler is moving away from emphasizing who the direct son was and who ruled the group. And in some cases, we don't have descendants, we have rulers. We have head of households, not necessarily sons. Could be cousins. But again, the chronicler is trying to establish this area of people and saying, as a descendant, you have the rights to this area, even though your descendant wasn't necessarily the son of a specific person who lived in that area.
Okay.
That's
interesting because he hasn't really done that for other tribes yet, has he?
That's right. Because in this Transjordan area is interesting. And we're going to look here. I want to make this point. Gad is really close. It says they lived in Gilead. This is that entire Transjordan area. Same as Reuben lived in Gilead. And they had its towns and in all the pasture lands in verse 16 of Sharon as far as the borders. Okay. And all these were enrolled. Verse 17 is an interesting one. All these people were enrolled in the genealogies in the days of Jotham, king of Judah, and in the days of Jeroboam, the king of Israel. So what's the significance of the genealogies coming from two different kings? I gave you a hint there in my notes.
I'm not sure.
Jotham.
The hint's not helping.
Okay. Jotham is the king of Judah, and Judah was in the south. And in the days of Jeroboam, king of Israel, Israel is the north. And remember, when Assyria came down, they captured the northern 10 tribes, all except for Judah and Benjamin.
Yeah.
And he's basically saying the records for Gad are recorded in both the southern kingdom that wasn't captured and the northern kingdom that was captured. So
Okay.
there are records from both kingdoms that establish Gad.
Got it. Okay.
Again, just a tiny little nation, tiny little tribe, but God is making sure that they're identified and that they're included in the distribution of the land after the exile.
Cool.
So God, again, paying attention to the details and paying attention to the little guy.
Yeah.
Now, if we go back, there's an interesting little group of verses from verse 18 down to verse 22. I want you to read all those verses from 18 down to 22. This is a kind of a parenthesis in the genealogies of these countries. So I want you to go back. Now, it's mentioned all three of the Transjordan people in verse 18. And I want you to read from verse 18 to 22, and we'll see a couple of good things.
Okay. The sons of Reuben and the Gadites and the half tribe of Manasseh, consisting of valiant men, men who bore shield and sword and shot with bow and were skillful in battle, were 44,760 who went to war. They made war against the Hagrites, Jetor, Naphish, and Nodab. They were helped against them, and the Hagrites and all who were with them were given into their hand. For they cried out to God in the battle, and he answered their prayers because they trusted in him. He took away their cattle, 50,000 camels, 250,000 sheep, 2,000 donkeys, and 100,000 men. For many fell slain because the war was of God, and they settled in their place until the exile.
Now, what's interesting, there's some interesting things here. All three of these Transjordan people are described as being valiant men, warriors, right? In verse 18. All right. And how many of them went to war? Right there.
Almost 50,000.
All right. Let's say 50,000. And they went to war, and they made war against actually two groups of people. Hagrites were over in their area, in their land. And then these other three are from the Arab areas over to even farther east.
Okay.
So they went to war against the people that were in the land and people that were their allies. And they were helped in this war. And the Hagrites and all who were with them were given into their hand, for they cried out to God in battle. So they fought this battle, this 50,000 men fought this battle righteously, and that they fought it in prayer. And
Okay.
he answered their prayers because they trusted in him. And I underlined that in red because I like that for my battles. I cry out to the Lord in my battles, and he answers because I trust in him. That's a great definition of faith, is fighting the good fight because we trust that God's going to help us.
Yeah.
Now, let's read 21 to think about it for a second. After this battle that God helped them with, they took away a lot. 50,000 camels, 250,000 sheep, 2,000 donkeys. You're talking about a fortune here in livestock, and 100,000 men. Now, that's significant because they take 100,000 men captive. How many men were there warriors?
Less than 50,000. So less than half.
50. They fought a force well over twice their size. And God gives them victory, saying it was miraculous that they won this victory.
Yeah.
There was overwhelming odds. And the plunder from this, the spoils of the battle, was just amazing. And the fact that they got 100,000 conquered prisoners plus the dead.
Right. Yeah.
So and it says there were a lot of dead. So this 50,000 guys went against a huge army and won because they trusted in God.
Oh, that's cool.
And it's just a kind of a neat kind of little parenthesis.
Yeah.
Now, why would that be important for the chronicler to write, and people coming out and says, many fell because of the war was of God, and they settled in their place until the exile. And this exile is the Babylonian captivity that they're just about to be released from.
Yeah.
Now, why would it be important to have this little footnote about this battle and God giving this tremendous victory? Why would that
Maybe
be?
just to reassure them that as they come back, God has given you this land.
They're coming back after all those years of captivity. They might be looking at saying, man, we got a job that we're going to take back the land. This is overwhelming. And I think there's a great footnote there that you can look at something that looks overwhelming. And if God's with you, you have a promise of victory, even in overwhelming odds, and a promise of overwhelming blessing.
Yeah.
Very important for the readers to get. Now, lastly, we want to look at Manasseh. I want to do this really quickly here, Kyle, because it's interesting from a number of places. We're going to go down here to the end. Just these 4 verses. Verse 23 starts, now the sons of the half-tribe lived in the land. And it talks about the geography of the land. But what do you notice about that verse? It talks about the sons of the half-tribe. Does it mention any of the sons? No. It's the sons lived in this area, but they're not mentioned, and they're never mentioned in this whole area. All that's mentioned in verse 24 is the heads of their families, the heads of their fathers' households, but they're not sons. They're just men of valor, famous men, heads of their fathers' households. You see that phrase there?
Yeah.
It's mentioned 3 times that they acted treacherously against God of the fathers who were head of their fathers' households, not necessarily their fathers. So it's very interesting. Manasseh is the only tribe in Chronicles that doesn't have any sons mentioned.
Okay.
And one of the reasons for that is because they have a big black eye. And that big black eye, at the end of verse 24, these heads of their fathers' households are described as men of valor, famous men. This relates back up to that war that they fought. But something happens in verse 25. There's a big but.
Okay. But they acted treacherously against the God of their fathers and played the harlot after the gods of the peoples of the land whom God had destroyed before them.
So they basically went after gods other than the God of Israel.
Yeah.
They started intermarrying and they started worshiping other gods besides God. So they acted treacherously against the God of their fathers, who is the God of Israel. And then it says, so the God of Israel stirred up the spirit of Pul, king of Assyria, even to the spirit of Pilgath-Pisan there, okay, the king of Assyria, and he carried them away into exile. Namely, he carries in the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. And they're carried away into the captivity because even though they were valiant, even though God had given them victory, they devolved into worshiping other gods. And God says, okay, I'm going to take your blessing away. But even though God had taken their blessing away, it's significant that he still includes them in the Chronicles to have their land distributed to their descendants or the descendants of the head of their households.
Yeah.
Basically, they're tribal leaders.
Yeah, it's almost like a micro picture within a few tribes of what happens really with all the tribes, which is despite them going astray, God disciplines and calls them back.
Yeah, that's good for us to know because it means maybe I blew it. And I got a really black eye because I did something that was not pleasing to the Lord. And he disciplined me. And now I'm back. I'm walking again. But I could say, is God going to hold that against me? Here's a good case where he doesn't hold it against them. They're still included. God wants to make sure that the Chronicle records that they still are part of the inheritance of Israel going back to the land.
Yeah.
And that's really good news for us, I think.
I agree.
Even though I'm I got no talents. I'm a nobody. I can't do anything. I've never amounted to much spiritually. I can still serve God in a way that he blesses against overwhelming odds. And if I stay valiant, he can bless me in a mighty way and include me in his major plans. Okay? Now,
Yeah.
there's one other thing. And did you consider why is this the half tribe of Manasseh?
Is it because Joseph's sons were Ephraim and Manasseh?
Very good. And when Joseph tried to get his father Judah to bless the kids, he blessed the younger one first, and an older guy, he just messed up the blessing. And Ephraim got the inheritance. Now, if we look back at a map real quick, because this helps explain this. Under the 12 tribes, notice how big Manasseh is?
Yeah.
Manasseh is in the Transjordan, but they're also on the west side here. And because Ephraim and Manasseh were blessed together, they traveled together in the wilderness. When it talks about they camped with the tabernacle, Ephraim and Manasseh camped together. So this huge area on the west was this area of Ephraim and Manasseh together. Over here is the half tribe of Manasseh that stayed in the Transjordan, stayed in Gilead. That's why they're called the half tribe, is because really they only have half the blessing. And that goes back to our point that we got, that even though Manasseh there that is talking about in the Transjordan is a half tribe, they still are included in the Chronicles.
Okay.
Okay. God
so
still
it's
wants
not
to make sure they get their blessing. And they're
so it's not that Manasseh and Ephraim are both half tribes. The half tribe refers specifically to the eastern half of Manasseh.
exactly.
Okay.
And when the west side Manasseh is talked about, it's talked about as Ephraim.
Okay.
It doesn't say the half tribe of West Manasseh. Basically, it's the half tribe of Manasseh is the one on the east side. And then Ephraim includes Manasseh and Ephraim on the west side.
Okay.
Interesting detail.
Very interesting.
It shows God is a God of details, and he takes care of the details, but the small details are not ignored by him. They're included in him. And that gives me hope that there's hope to be used by him and blessed by him and to be significant in history just because I surrender to what he wants me to do.
Yeah.
In there. Now, next week, we start to go into the last of the tribes, and that's the genealogy of the priests, the Levites. That is significant for the chronicler because they're going to set up the temple and the temple worship. So the priests become hugely important in the Chronicles. Well, we've been talking about the God of details and how he blesses and understands and appreciates the smallest details. I want to recommend a video to you. It's along that same line. It's called God Works Details for Your Good. It's out of the 7th chapter of the book of Esther. And I think you'll find it a blessing. And if you do, be sure to hit subscribe and the like button. That helps us with YouTube. Listen, we're going to continue in our study in 1 Chronicles next week. And until then, God bless you.